So the next film, we had a. We're gonna go over on this one, and I'm totally okay with that. Just knowing what number one is.
Well, I mean, if you want to I know we wanted to kind of keep this down, and as in comparison to our last episode and the one before that.
Right.
I don't know if you wanted to kind of roll through 4, 3, and 2, because I know 1 was definitely the one that we wanted to focus on the most.
Well, we still got 5 to get through.
Oh, shit, man. Jesus.
All right. Well, here's the thing. The longer we talk, the longer. All right. So I'll get through these next few. Okay. Number 2, I definitely want to talk about before we get to the main, to the creme de la creme. But the next movie I have on here, it's Blinded by the Light. Now, I don't know if you remember this movie from last year. It was definitely a bit of a smaller film. It came out by a large production company. It was a Warner Brothers film. Mm-hmm. I had the chance to see this movie. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. You were going to say something?
No. I was going to say vaguely, but go on.
Okay. But it was a movie that came out last year, and it's supposed to be kind of a comedy, sort of comedy drama film, but it's basically the story of a journalist who lives in the UK who, it's set in the 80s, and it's about a Pakistani family living in the UK, and the son is trying to fit in high school, and he ends up basically falling in love with the music of Bruce Springsteen. Now, I'm not as big of a Bruce Springsteen fan as I am a Bob Dylan fan, but this movie, there's something about this movie that I was able to relate to it to some extent, simply because, growing up where I did and listening to music that was, I grew up listening to a lot of older music. I know you know that.
Right.
This was something that was relatable in terms of listening to more classic rock that hit at home, but it was also relatable in every kind of way. And, I like some of Bruce Springsteen's songs. There was one song of his that I fell in love with after I saw this movie, even though I think I had heard it previously, Promised Land. But the movie touches on, it's kind of like, if remind me, you've seen Bohemian Rhapsody, right?
I have. A little late than most, but I have twice. Thoroughly enjoyed each time. Definitely the second time more than the first, because you go into something with a fresh look at it, but the basis of, hey, I've seen this, and my God, is this great? It's the type of movie that ages like wine. It really does.
You've said it beautifully. Yeah. Well, it's one of my favorite movies of all time, and trust me, this isn't the last time I'm going to bring up Bohemian Rhapsody. Stay tuned for movie number 1. Believe it or not. But it's kind of like if you had to imagine, all the scenes where you see Freddie Mercury with his family, but basically imagine that whole story without the story of him becoming a rock and roll god. And that's kind of what this film is about. And it's, watching this young man basically fight off his father. The lead character's name is Javed Khan, and he's trying to fit into his high school. He wants to be a writer, and he's also dealing with, he lives in an English neighborhood where there is bigotry, there are skinheads, and he has to find a way to kind of fight off against that bigotry and, to some extent, the fascism that he's got to deal with in his local area. And he kind of fights it by listening to the music of Bruce Springsteen and channeling that into what he says, what he does, how he lives, how he eats, how he sleeps. And there's something so beautiful about it that, a lot of people tried comparing this movie with Yesterday, which I was amped for, and I ended up being very about the movie, about yesterday, even because I'm me, I'm the world's biggest Beatles fan.
Right.
I relate to yesterday an immense deal because there's times where I genuinely feel like the only person on earth who knows the Beatles, or their music. But Blinded by the Light was so it like Bohemian Rhapsody and our number one movie. Let me put it this way: it's so relevant to today's time period, and the idea of fighting against hatred, tradition, and all the powers that try to constrain you. The idea of fighting that with music that just gets into your bones. It's so relatable and it's beautiful, and getting to watch this character fall in love with Springsteen's music is unlike anything I've seen in a movie. So it's well worth a watch. If you get the chance to find it anywhere, please, and that's the thing is I mentioned It Chapter 2, it's a big blockbuster, blah, blah, blah. This is the polar opposite. This is not a blockbuster at all.
Interesting.
And that's another thing you'll probably notice by the end of this list is that there's also plenty of Warner Brothers films on here. That's because there, and this is me strictly saying this, there were just a lot of really decent, really great Warner Brothers movies last year. I'm if I'm being totally upfront about it. So after that, we then have The Report, which is it's a change of pace in terms of production company. It's a video that you can find on Amazon Prime Video, and it's a historical drama about the Senate Intelligence Committee's torture report, which basically touches on what the Bush administration and what the Pentagon used to call enhanced interrogation techniques, also known as torture.
Jesus.
It's. I never thought I would see a film that would make me feel so radically different politically to another film that I really loved and enjoyed, to the point where I've disassociated myself from that other film. And long story short, watching, well, that's because when you watch The Report, and it's kind of a spoiler, but Adam Driver plays the lead character of the film. I have his name written down. Let me kind of scroll through my notes again. Daniel Jones, who he's a staffer under California Senator Dianne Feinstein. There's a moment in the film. He's basically the guy in charge of this torture report, that he has to write an entire report for the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he's getting bombarded with not only the frightening facts, but also dealing with Pentagon and the CIA trying to finagle their way into basically getting him out of a job somehow. And there's a moment in the film where Adam Driver's character is watching a trailer for Zero Dark 30. And the look on his face is total defeat, because basically what you find out from the report is that Zero Dark 30 is based off of CIA propaganda, which is the fact that for several years all of our intelligence agencies would argue, oh, we're not torturing anybody to, find terrorists. But when it came down to finding Osama bin Laden, the argument was enhanced interrogation works because it helped us find Osama bin Laden. That is categorically false.
So it was just like the justification of it then.
Well, yeah, it was basically the CIA trying to make up justification for torture. And number one, enhanced interrogation was not used to hunt down or locate Osama bin Laden. And so the idea that you have an intelligence agency that will first lie and then turn around and admit it was helpful in a good way is staggering. And I think, politics aside, and when I mean politics aside, I mean like partisanship aside, because I have some of my issues with the United States Senate. But I think what Daniel Jones was trying to do, because Adam Driver plays his character is a real person, Daniel J. Jones, and the amount of crap this guy had to go through is remarkable. And I think in a lot of ways, this is the kind of espionage film that should arguably be brought up from now until the end of time. Kind of like in journalism school, kind of like how All the President's Men is treated as like the gold standard for American journalism.
Right.
I think Horror should be the same kind of movie. The acting is phenomenal. Adam Driver, Annette Bening, John Hamm, they're all outstanding in this movie. And I think, it's a sobering story because obviously this all takes place prior to the Trump administration, prior to somebody who advocated for torture, Gina Haspel, becoming the CIA director. And to top it all off, it shows the levels of how much the Obama administration pushed back against the Senate Intelligence Committee. And it's one of those things where it makes you look at history differently, or at least if you already looked at history differently, it affirmed what you already knew. I take it this is something you would check out in a heartbeat.
Definitely. No, definitely. I mean, the whole government espionage shtick. I mean, I don't mean to use the word shtick because, that's like negative connotation to it, but essentially it revolving around it is, I'm sold. Let's just say. So.
And then our number 3 film, and this is the funny thing is that this is the longest movie on this list, and we're probably going to try and spend the least amount of time talking about it. The Irishman. Now, did you see it? Did you get to watch the first season of The Irishman?
The Irishman. Let's see here. I'm just trying to recall. I don't think so. I remember seeing it advertised, though I'm not sure that I actually saw it though.
It's I can't say that I'm a diehard Martin Scorsese fan. One of his more recent-ish movies, The Departed, that's one of my favorite Warner Brothers films. But The Irishman, the idea of getting a movie that has Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, and Al Pacino all on screen together is such a delight.
I mean, it just kind of sounds like a good movie.
and my love for Al Pacino. Let's put it this way: there was a worry among some film viewers as to how soon in the film that Joe Pesci goes full Pesci. Or Joe Pesci. Excuse me. How Al Pacino goes full Pacino. And let me tell you something. He goes full Pacino in probably 75% of the time he's on screen. And it is beautiful. And you know what? I hinted on this earlier with It Chapter 2 with the digital de-aging. Mm-hmm. It's noticeable for sure.
Wow.
But it's still pretty damn good. And the interesting part is it was the digital de-aging. It's the same. It's all done through Skywalker Sound. Or not Skywalker Sound, rather. It's at Industrial Light and Magic at Skywalker Ranch, which is basically where you get the same kind of special effects and sound treatment for just about every movie under the sun. This is the same digital de-aging that they gave for the Marvel actors in various Marvel films. I'm not a big Marvel guy, so bear with me on that one. It was also interesting getting to hear an interview where I got to hear Al Pacino say the word Skywalker. I could die happy tomorrow. But yeah, getting to see these guys, and they're old, they're in their 70s, and they're supposed to be playing characters that are in their 30s and 40s. But you know what? That's a part of your suspense of disbelief, whatever you call it, that you kind of have to just kind of let it go and realize, you know what? These actors are giving 110%, and they're absolutely phenomenal in this movie. The union aspect with Jimmy Hoffa, that was something that I didn't anticipate. And in a lot of ways, it made it a much more interesting movie for me. And I also like gangster films. I love I love The Godfather. I love the TV show The Sopranos. So
of course.
Let me put it this way to you. It's something you're gonna have to dedicate a little bit of time to.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it definitely sounds like an investment.
Oh, it's 3.5 hours. It's an investment. Yeah. And hey, let me tell you something. I never thought I'd be more happy to see Ray Romano in a movie. He's great. He's so great in The Irishman. So, but anyway, I'm going to make sure that my talk on The Irishman is the diametric opposite of how long the movie is. Number 2, Velvet Buzzsaw. This is a movie that came out last year. It's a Netflix film, and it stars Jake Gyllenhaal, Rene Russo, John Malkovich, and it's the same creative team that made Nightcrawler, and to some degree it has kind of the same veneer as Nightcrawler, which is it's taking an aspect of Los Angeles, and in a lot of ways this movie may have inadvertently been a inspiration for this very podcast. But
well, that's subtle.
Because this movie basically pulls and pokes fun at the art critique industry, and it's so interesting when it comes to how it handles that, but also the acting. Now I remember in our Star Wars conversation you brought up the term camp in relation to the sequel trilogy. Mm-hmm. This movie is campy, 100%.
Oh no! I wait. In regards to the sequel trilogy, I'm pretty sure camp was the butt end of a very out of taste joke as well. If anyone bothered to catch that, but I did say it was campy as well. Yes,
right.
I do stand by the fact that little to in comparison to the original and hell, even the prequel trilogies in some regard,
right.
Much less risks were taken with 7, 8, and 9, especially 7, and I will take that to my grave. I will take that
on 7. You're right. On 7, you're absolutely right. But with Velvet Buzzsaw, like let me put it this way: it really does take those camp elements and it embraces it. This was a movie that was originally marketed as a thriller. It is not. But the fact that you go into that movie thinking that, I would argue, is the healthiest viewpoint to have about that movie, because you go into it expecting to be mortified and terrified of what you see, and you end up getting probably one of the most topical movies that has ever come out in recent years, probably since Chinatown, when it comes to Los Angeles / Hollywood. And Jake Gyllenhaal, he's one of my favorite actors. He's outstanding in the movie. He's definitely playing a very very different character than who he played in Nightcrawler. But like these are two. Let me put it this way: his character in Nightcrawler and his character in Velvet Buzzsaw, you could see them bump into each other on a street corner in downtown LA, and you just want to see a movie on that because it's going to be the most Los Angeles movie you've ever seen. But it's like that was a movie. This was a movie I rewatched a lot last year. It came out early in the year, and I it's really hard to tell why, because it's poking fun at the art industry. It's poking fun at the socioeconomic, tendencies of the art industry in Los Angeles, and it's just this, like, there's something about it that's very Shakespearean in the sense of the Shakespearean phrase of kill all the lawyers. It's very evocative of that expression, but in terms to art critics. Let's put it that way, without spoiling, but inadvertently spoiling the movie. And so since we're at that magical moment, we might as well get to number one, because we have such little time left. Number one from last year, Star Wars, The Rise of... No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, fuck
Joker.
off. So this is actually
Joker.
this is actually very interesting to hear.
Mm-hmm.
When we were talking about this earlier, pre-recording,
Yeah.
you were very surprised that I would even put this movie at my top 5. And here I am seeing that it's at your top 1. So
Yeah.
I think before we kind of go into it, what made you change your mind? Because I do know that this wasn't your number one pick. You were very much not against the idea of it being your number one pick, but more so, you wanted to save it for something like Velvet Buzzsaw. I think I remember you telling me. So
No, it was when we were on Touchdowns and Tangents. I brought it up that Joker was because I think I said it to Pete, where I said something along the lines of...
I don't think it was explicitly stated. I knew that you held the movie in such high regard, and at that moment when we were on Touchdowns and Tangents, also shout out, shameless plug.
Shout out to Kenny. I have no idea what the next episode for them is going to be like with everything going on, but you know what? I'm excited.
I don't remember you explicitly stating that it was your number one, I guess, favorite movie of all time, if we're kind of breaking it down.
Well, favorite movie of 2019.
Or 2019, I'm sorry.
Because what I had mentioned earlier before we started recording this was what I fought with was whether or not it could potentially rival my favorite Batman film, but also become part of my top 10. Because, like I said earlier, my top 5, they're blockbusters. Number one, my favorite movie of all time, surprise, surprise, The Empire Strikes Back. Number 2 is the 1989 Tim Burton Batman. And then 3, 4, and 5, they're kind of interchangeable, but it's a perfect Spielberg trilogy. It's Jurassic Park, it's Jaws, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and then after that it starts getting kind of all over the place.
Thank you so much. People will fucking die for Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I'm like, you know what? Comparison to Last Crusade, it ain't got shit. It really doesn't.
But here's the thing, though. Let me tell you, for a while, I cheated. And I used to say to people, my top 10 favorite movies are, beginning with number 11. And that's because for a while, Raiders and Last Crusade were neck and neck with each other. And I finally came to the realization that Last Crusade was the one that I gravitated to just because of how much it reveals about Indiana Jones's history. And then,
well, I mean, you could take out the whole sort of I like to call it like the set in stone motif, where the character really gets a lot of his attributes from the past by showcasing the past and further emphasizing it to the present. his fear of snakes, where he gets the bullwhip, on the train, right? This was like his Boy Scout years or whatever, when he finds the oh God, what is it?
To
The
some
Ankh?
extent, I can relate to that.
There you go.
But even like the next 5 after that, like it starts to get a little bit more. As our first episode was called, it's a bit eclectic, as you see, where you get like Wayne's World, Frida, Bohemian Rhapsody, and it gets a little bit more jaunted and a little bit more all over the place. And with Joker, you know, and I touched on this earlier about Bohemian Rhapsody, which is the fact that Joker and Bohemian Rhapsody are the two movies that both identify most with the time that we live in. And mind you, this is all pre-coronavirus.
Yes.
Because in a lot of ways, I think Bohemian Rhapsody fills that gap that the 1977 Star Wars film did, or if we're talking about music, it fills in the gap that the Eagles' song "Take It Easy" kind of it breathed life into the arts back then. Because, you know, you think about the 70s, you had Watergate, you had Nixon, you had the war in Vietnam barely winding down. And so you needed some kind of release for the American public. And so what did you get? You got Take It Easy, which was literally the Eagles' message to the whole world. And then several years later, you had George Lucas come out with Star Wars. And I think Bohemian Rhapsody, other than giving a whole generation, two or three generations of people, the chance to experience, to some degree, experience what it was like to watch a Queen concert
without actually being at Live Aid, or
exactly.
really like their rise to stardom. Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, the whole being moved element.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. Let me put it to you this way. I'm sitting on a plane on a trip, and out of all the movies I can see on the plane, I decide to not see Bohemian Rhapsody. And I'll tell you why that this is important in a second. I actually decided to see another movie, which is actually another one of my top 5. Now I know it's on my top 5. It's a much lower budget film, but it stars Melissa McCarthy. So I decided to not see Bohemian Rhapsody. And then,
was it the movie with Richard E. Grant?
Yes, it was. Can you?
It was like don't. Yeah. I've heard of that one. Yeah, I heard that was really great.
But I opted to not see Bohemian Rhapsody in lieu of that. When I finally did see Bohemian Rhapsody, it was like, wow, this is what I missed. And to tell you the truth, I'm not mad at missing this, because it just makes this such a great movie because I'm seeing it now, kind of thing.
Right.
So I had fine with waiting. I knew I was going to see Bohemian, and I did. I'm glad I saw it when I did. I wish I could see it again for the first time.
Oh, I hear you. Oh, I'm the same way, because I got to see it at the IMAX headquarters. So now when I saw it, there was very limited seating. So I kind of had that moment like in the Seinfeld episode where they were sitting in the front row watching a movie, and I kind of had that experience, but it didn't rob me of my experience getting to feel like I was at Live Aid or feel like I was at a concert. And
I mean, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, since we should be talking about Joker, since Joker
I was going to segue that into Joker, because like Bohemian Rhapsody,
go ahead.
There really isn't a film besides Joker that you can really see again and say, shit, I really wish I could see that again for the first time, because planting yourself in, I guess the shoes of Arthur Fleck in
The clown shoes or the regular shoes?
Not so much in the perspective of how the media, I guess, has portrayed the Joker movie and the community surrounding it, which is extremely unfortunate. Whether you're right, left, or center, fuck you and the negative attributes of how you've really painted the picture of this movie, how you've painted the community of people who, much to the tune of Fleck, are just misunderstood,
right.
And I don't really want to go off on sort of like a mental health diatribe of it, because I don't find myself associated with any such conditions or whatnot, but Joker, and we've said this before, and we've said this at a time where I did not see the movie, but I still had my own opinion on it, because I knew what I was getting into. I knew it wasn't going to be a Batman movie through and through, and that's not what I got, and I'm glad that's not what I got.
Now, that being said, I will go so far as to say, now, I mentioned already that 89 Batman, that's my favorite Batman movie. Don't get me wrong, much love to The Dark Knight. That's one of the greatest, like, if we're talking about, like, the best made films of all time, The Dark Knight's in the top 3.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
Easily.
But when it comes to Joker performances, like, I went with a mutual friend of ours, Brandon, and he's a massive Joker fan. Massive Joker fan.
The big thing about Joker, and sort of honestly the see lazy thing to do, is to see how any performance is going to stack up to Heath Ledger. Now, I don't know what kind of pedestal you're, putting Heath Ledger on, and this is in no way denoting him as an actor. I think he was fantastic in The Dark Knight. There's a reason it's a fucking near perfect score on IMDb.
Same.
However, I think when it comes to Joker movies, and really every single Joker-related media we've ever had, you have to analyze them on different merits. I am not associating any actor besides Mark Hamill when it comes to the animated series. Okay.
Right.
But that is kind of that's the outlier, right? Because it's either animation or video games, which Mark Hamill also did the voice for that, all the Arkham games.
3. He did 3 out of the 4. Troy.
He did 3 out of the 4.
I think it was Troy Baker. I think that was
Troy
his name. Troy Baker.
Troy Baker, Nolan North. Or is it
Tony Baker? No, it's Troy Baker.
Troy Baker. Those are the veterans of voice acting. But anyway.
Well, Troy Baker did Arkham Origins, and then Mark Hamill did the other 3 Arkham games. He did
Arkham Knight. Now, judging Joaquin Phoenix's Joker to Heath Ledger, again, you got to look at this in a general sense of all 4 of them, if you want to count Mark Hamill, are accomplishing different tasks. Okay. So you really can't stack up one's performance against the other. Okay, you can only look at the film as what it was attempting to portray. And this in-depth origin story of a character that has been shrouded in mystery since Bob Kane fucking created him. There's not a movie, I guess if you want my take on it, there is not a movie that has made me feel more uncomfortable, more unsettled, and that's its job. And it did it flawlessly. Yeah. You and I both agreed. And it's even heightened now that I've just recently seen it for the first time. You do not watch The Joker to be entertained. That's not its purpose.
To
enjoy it.
Yeah.
Okay. The dialogue, the mannerisms, the interactions, what little of it there are between Fleck and kind of his ex-coworkers, his love interest, if you can call it that, even his own mother, are so rife with introversy. It's unsettlingly relatable. in a sense that if someone overtly has this type of condition, it's scary to watch, it's scary to analyze, and by all intents and purposes, it's scary to represent.
Yeah.
Because with the drastic PC shift that's occurred in the last 20 years, there really is no such thing anymore as telling an offensive joke and getting off scot-free with it. Okay.
Right.
Because the whole spectrum of misrepresentation, God help you if you do so, much less do so in bad taste. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that Joker kind of I feel like it did hit the nail on the head in terms of its execution. From start to finish. There were moments where it even brought a tear to my eye. I'm not even going to lie.
Oh, wow.
I look at people different on public transport.
Mm-hmm.
And more importantly, I do know that there are people who are just genuinely out there wanting to make people laugh, not only just to make people laugh, make people smile, but let the door, open the door to a way of, this is how you can understand me.
Right.
And I felt like it did it. I felt like it did it in a way that really no other movie has done or do, or hell, if I haven't seen it yet, please refer me to some. I don't think I really ever have been touched by a movie's execution. You can look at the gruesomeness, you can look at the violence, and the end justifies the means. The Machiavellian, well, that's life, and you get what you fucking deserve tropes of the movie.
Yeah.
But that's life.
The funny thing with the movie is that, I remember the way I would describe it to some people is there's only been two other times in the last decade or so where I've seen a movie that's been so cerebral. And those other two times, one of which, believe it or not, was Star Wars The Last Jedi. Come at me, fanboys. And the other time was Inception. This was a movie that, and as I said it earlier, I'm a huge Batman fan. I'm one of those people where, as much as I love the ambiguity of the Joker's origin, I grew up on the idea that the Joker had an origin story. And that is, for all intents and purposes, because of the 1989 Batman film. I love the story that Jack Napier, a version of the Joker, started out as a gangster who killed Bruce Wayne's parents.
Mm-hmm.
And then decades later, because of Bruce Wayne, fell into a vat of chemicals. Now, obviously, that's not what you see in Joker, but getting a very, altered take on what happens with the Joker in the Dark Knight Returns graphic novel, where he's going on a talk show and he's threatening to kill people, and then he does kill people on the talk show.
No, he's not threatening to kill people. That's the thing. People interpret people interpret Fleck as if he would do something. Now, granted, yes, he did on the subway, but
he does on the show. He that's the thing, is that he threatens De Niro. Spoilers for a movie that's been out since, I think, November. He threatens De Niro before he kills him. So it is like the Dark Knight Returns, where he says, I'm going to kill everyone, and then he starts gassing people.
Okay, but the thing about, again, spoiler, the thing about the end of Joker is that, as warped and twisted as this is,
mm-hmm.
he had a semi-justifiable reason for at least getting angry. Now, yes, De Niro's character made him a laughingstock on his show, and to a point, brought him on the show to make fun of him. You know, granted, nobody understood his joke because it was in bad taste on the show when he made his knock knock joke. But you got to understand, I mean, that was the pressure gauge. Okay, so he knew what he was going to do before he came on the show, which was obviously, and inadvertently, I think, because it's said throughout multiple times throughout the movie that his actions were not in a political state of mind. He just wanted to do this because he felt it was necessary. And to some degree, maybe it was. And then the droves of people in clown masks and makeup following him at the end of the movie, you know, placing him on this pedestal, that was just the result of what had happened.
Yeah. Well, and I think that ties in perfectly with why I think this movie, you know, the reason why we bring up Bohemian Rhapsody in relation to Joker is that I feel as though both of these movies totally encapsulate the times that we live in. Again, like I said earlier, pre-coronavirus.
Well, the rife narcissism and almost sort of psychotic nature of people, you know, because both stories in their own rights are both origin and downfall stories.
Okay, yeah.
You know? So
I see it that way.
It's the ugly truth of, you know, life isn't all glamorous. Obviously, Joker portrays this more, I'm not going to say more effectively, but I mean, you know, given the setting, the dialogue, the character arc, you know, It isn't all sunshine and rainbows. Bohemian Rhapsody, it is for a short moment.
I guess.
And then,
I guess the easiest way to describe it is Bohemian Rhapsody is what we want to be and what we want to live in, and Joker is our reality. And I feel that was something that, because, you know, I told you earlier before we recorded that, you know, I went with our mutual friend Brandon. I went with a few other friends of ours as well, a few other mutual friends of ours, and all of us went in amped. Now, I was imagining this movie to be horrendously violent. Like, I'm talking American History X violent, like curb stomping violent. Oh, even worse than John Wick, in terms of violence. But I ended up leaving it feeling more unsettled. And, you know, typically when I come out of a movie, even if it's a movie that I don't really like, I end up saying probably the same thing every time, which is, and I quote myself, yeah, I enjoyed it. Joker was the first movie in probably, or let's put it this way, it was the first movie that I loved where I walked out of it and I said out loud, I did not enjoy it. And I think that's the point, because, and again, this kind of ties in with, you know, the best Joker actor of all time. Because if you're asking me, frankly, it is Joaquin Phoenix. And I think that's because this movie with Arthur Fleck, it took the Joker in a direction that I think was far too recognizable for an audience like what you would get circa 2020. And I think that's ultimately what made it so much more of a memorable performance. And that you could easily bump into somebody like this, more so than somebody who resembles either Jack Nicholson or Heath Ledger's Joker. If we're just talking those three actors specifically. And I think that's what makes it all the more terrifying with this Joker, is that this is the version I could easily bump into one day. And it doesn't matter if it's, you know, in Gotham City or Los Angeles. This is the interpretation that I would be most terrified of. Because just, if you had to narrow it down to the scene where he kills one of his coworkers and he lets the other one live, That's how terrifying he is. I remember I watched that scene in the theater and thought, that other coworker is dead meat, and he lived.
Yeah.
And think,
and more to the point, he had some compassion when addressing him as opposed to the coworker that he killed, and he liked them both equally. One of them gave him a gun, which was which is the Joker's trademark weapon.
Right.
The bang gun. Well, I mean, it goes bang in another way too, but it was just sort of the staunch reality of, and I'm no doctor, I'm no medicinal commentator. I can only comment as I see it.
Right.
It was the staunch reality of what the psychosis was doing to him, what his conditions were doing to him.
Yeah.
The bipolar nature, I guess you could say, of how he interpreted these people's lives. I at first I thought, oh, well, he let him live because, well, he's short. You know what I mean? And like people would feel bad for him. But the thing is, he didn't see him as short. While other people made fun of him, he still looked at him as a human. Was that the reason why he let him go as opposed to the other guy? The other guy treated him just as nicely. But
I think the take on that is the other guy screwed him over, whereas this other guy was so nice to him, and superficially nice, that was the simplicity in why he let the other character live. And I think before, because we're far over where we should be timing wise, there's one other thing I want to ask you about before we wrap things up, which is because a lot of people that I love and admire about film were critical of the movie, and you know what, rightfully so. All film is subjective. But I know one of my favorite film reviews, was by one of the Chapo Trap House guys, Felix Biederman, who wasn't a big fan of the movie, by the way.
Can I ask why he wasn't?
He wrote a whole article for I think it was for Deadspin, focused on it, and it largely focused on the classism, but also the filmmaking techniques in trying to make it feel relatable in the sense of incel culture. So
I want to ask this. Okay. I want to ask where he kind of leans on the political spectrum, Chapo.
The Chapo guys? Oh, they're more like socialist left.
Okay. So I want to ask, just sort of as an overarching question regarding, leftist policy and interpretation of Joker. Right. As in, people are making these assumptions, or they had been at the time, of these assumptions of it's racist, it's classist, it's this, it's that. As I'm watching the movie, I'm realizing how anti-capitalist it is. I'm realizing how racially diverse it is. Okay.
Right.
I'm realizing how the interpretation of, God forbid, a white man's lack of sanity is being portrayed. Okay. These are all things that more often than not, you don't normally see. Okay. And the thing about the whole, the racial card of Fleck having that black love interest, or more so the anti-capitalism, going against Thomas Wayne is the whole point.
Yeah.
These weren't ham-fisted or shoehorned in by any means. I felt that they were very natural. So it's not so much that I'm asking where these complaints are coming from, because the whole incel culture, I feel, is a very kind of moot point, because I don't look at them as incels. I look at them as just people who perhaps don't understand social norms or boundaries, and perhaps do need to be talked to. Again, I'm not one to diagnose, but then again, I'm not one to toss someone to the side either.
Well, I think there's two aspects to that. One of which is because I'm of the firm opinion that you do have kind of an incel culture in the United States currently, and I know that that's a topic that the Chapo guys talk about fairly frequently, to pretty interesting detail. But and this is where you and I agree, and I diverge from most of the Chapo guys, because I know one of the hosts, Matt Chrisman, really liked the movie, really liked it. Which is, I could see the sort of class elements of Joker and found it and this is why I relate the movie so much to our current period, is I find the classist elements of it to be so relatable.
Yes.
More so than any other Batman film. Because let's face it, Gotham City is so topsy-turvy between the 99% and the 1%. And Joker, even though, some of the critics, and when I mean some, I include the Chapo guys with all, due respect to them,
mm-hmm.
As superficial as a lot of that was addressed in the film, I frankly found it to be appropriately superficial. And the reason why
thank you, because you know how you make an omelet? It's by breaking some eggs. Okay.
You say that, and that's exactly what Jack Nicholson's Joker said. Oh my goodness.
You do have to face these inconvenient truths. I'm sorry, because I gotta be honest, Thomas Wayne's portrayal, I can't remember the actor off the top of my head.
He was in The Dark Knight Rises, by the way.
Right.
Actor.
Thomas Wayne's portrayal was spot on of how I would consider any egocentric, essentially corporate powerhouse to be, but in interviews, so ridiculously complacent. And I got to tell you, this was the character arc I had been waiting for in terms of the Joker.
See, what's fascinating about that is
you have this formulaic approach to someone's rise to power or rise to stardom in a way where you're going to fight it, fake it, do whatever you need to do till you make it, and be all gung-ho about what you believe in, up to the point of, I guess in Fleck's case, not being understood or being misrepresented in society, to the point of being, once you're at the top, being so complacent, being so, that's life. Because that's what Thomas Wayne said. That's life.
Two elements on that, because you're 100% on point. One of which is in regards to Thomas Wayne. I think that's the interesting dynamic that Joker has compared with any Batman film that's ever been made, is that, and this extends even to like The Dark Knight Returns, which in that graphic novel, there's a significant argument as to, is Batman a fascist or is he an anti-fascist? And a similar argument could be made about Thomas Wayne, which is, if you're looking at it from the point of view of Arthur Fleck and the rest of Gotham City, Thomas Wayne is this eccentric billionaire who thinks he can make Gotham great again, long story short. However, if any Batman continuity that we know of teaches us something, it teaches us the point of view of the Wayne family, basically, of Thomas Wayne, Martha Wayne, Bruce Wayne, and their level of sympathy over arguably a lack of solidarity with the masses of Gotham City. And that ties in with my second point, which is the reason why I agree more with you rather than with some of the critics of Joker that criticize the class elements of it, is that Arthur Fleck doesn't give a damn about the class conflicts in Gotham City.
Yeah, he doesn't give a shit about. He does not even give a shit about power let alone a platform to be understood on. Now, granted,
Exactly.
when he's at Pogo's, when he's on stage and he makes a fool out of himself, the only reason that he got mad about that in the first place was because he was showcased, he was spotlighted in such a negative connotation where a show, someone that he really looked up to, De Niro's character, would put him in this negative spotlight. Okay. The great thing about himself being at Pogo's, that scene in general, was that as cringeworthy as it was for the first 2 minutes, because you know how he is, you know his mannerisms and everything. The fact that scene was great was that they cut audio to it. Okay.
Yeah.
And all you heard was applause, because at the end of the day, you yourself as an audience member are thinking, oh, maybe it did go well. But then again, you look at it and you're like, no, he didn't. But in that moment where he didn't, it didn't even matter to him at all. Because it was his psychosis telling him, I'm funny. I made people laugh. And that's the most important part. Okay. We're not digging deeper into how that positive, reinforcement, even if it is a little bit, fake, can be important.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, that's what just makes it so important is, if you like the concept or the character of the Joker based on what you've seen prior to Joaquin Phoenix, you take what you know and you watch what's before. It's arguably like any film sequel, even though Joker by no means is a sequel to what we've seen before. But, you take what you've seen of the character of the Joker and see where that kind of gets tied in with future incarnations. And the line "everything burns" from Heath Ledger's Joker ties in perfectly with the amount of distance that Joaquin Phoenix has to the class problems in Gotham City in Joker. You're realizing that is the connective tissue that every cinematic Joker has had to his predecessor. And I think to a large extent that was a part of what made this Joker so interesting, was that he did take an element of what it means to be Joker. And even though the film is supposed to be set in like a late 70s, early 80s Gotham, that level of relatability to now is so clear and so obvious to me that, it just makes me fathom at how you could go from something like this to something else. And what I mean by that is, how do you get a Joker sequel if there ever will be one? Probably not.
You don't. And you know what?
And not only that,
that's fine.
How do you reinvent the Joker after this? Because let's face it, you have Robert Pattinson's Batman. That's supposedly going to be a trilogy. How do you get a Joker in those three films?
You don't.
And who's it going to be? And how is it going to be? Like that's daunting after what Joaquin Phoenix has done. And by the way, we're already at the 2-hour mark.
Great. No, but I mean, kind of to wrap this up, I love the Joker.
Well, I had one question left. I'll let you finish.
Sure. Well, no, I was just going to say, generally, you have such a grab bag of Batman villains. Figure it out is my declaration. It doesn't have to be the Joker. All right. Bane, Scarecrow, and oh God, what was the other villain? I guess if you want to count Joel Schumacher's Poison Ivy and Mr. Freeze, that's not even scraping the surface of the fucking make a Red Hood.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah. You got Red Hood. You got Ventriloquist. You got Kite Man. You have Condiment King. There are so many Batman villains to choose from. Man-Bat.
I don't know. Now, but go ahead. What was the question?
Before I get to the question, let me tell you, getting to play Mr. Freeze That was a real moment to be in the movie with the Bane and the Batgirl and don't go to the restaurants. Anyway, my question to you was going to be, and this was something I heard from a movie critic that I really admire, Dan Murrell, about the Batman elements of Joker almost trivialized the seriousness of the film. Do you feel that way at all? Because I'm personally of the opinion of the Batman elements are what elevated the film.
Do I feel
because like this is something that could happen in any movie,
right.
But the idea that this is happening in a universe that you would imagine, would have a kid-friendly veneer. But clearly it can go well beyond being kid-friendly. And, of course, we already knew that going back to Heath Ledger, but now we've proved it again.
Cutting the bullshit, because this was rated R, and rightfully so, I knew damn well that Joaquin Phoenix was going to do something that Heath Ledger either couldn't or initially didn't. Okay?
Right.
I knew this was going to be a much darker origin story through and through. Essentially, that's what I got. But do I feel that the whole Batman added elements of a young Bruce, Thomas and Martha Wayne are still alive kind of trope, do I feel like it added to it? Yeah, a little bit. Did it feel a little shoehorned for them to get shot in the alley? Yeah, a little bit. Because you got to understand this. You know how Batman came to be. I know how Batman came to be. Anyone within a 3-mile radius comprised of cells, millions of cells growing throughout millions of years, fucking knows how Batman came to be, okay?
Now make sure you maintain that social distancing.
Oxymoron.
Yeah.
When it comes to Batman, I liked the idea of it. I liked the fact that you don't need to see The Dark Knight to know how this is how The Dark Knight came into being.
Yeah.
But then again, you got to understand that not every Batman movie needs to have Batman for it to be effective, okay? The whole omnipotence, the heroic vigilantism, omnipotence of Batman is already there. You know he's coming, okay?
Yeah.
But then again, when you watch Joker, you know you're watching it for Joker, okay?
Yeah.
I admired the fact that they tried to once again beat a dead horse and introduce the fact that this is how he came into being. But you know what? At the end of the day, I knew it was fan service. Okay. I knew that it was necessary to introduce a hero that we've been knowing since the fucking 20s. But did I feel
Joker, I think, was early 40s.
No, I mean when Batman first started. Wasn't it 20s?
Oh, no, 30s.
Oh, 30s. I'm sorry. But Joker came in with Batman #1. Like it was the first. It was the first edition.
#2.
No,
it was #2.
You look at Joker, and Joker made its first appearance in Batman #1.
Oh, because I could have sworn there was at least a year difference.
Yeah, first appearance, Batman #1, April 25th. Oh, 1940. Okay. So both times.
Remember, that's Batman #1. He was already in Detective Comics.
That's true. Okay. So we're going back even further.
Batman, I think started, it was 38 or 39. I think it was 39 because Superman was 38.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess the TLDR, do I feel like it added anything? It was definitely a neat sub story.
Right.
But would I have been fine if it wasn't even introduced? Yes, I would have. The movie would have. I feel like the movie would have carried itself along just fine without it. But it was a neat addition. It really was. It was a neat addition to see how familial, I guess, how these two characters were connected, even if it was through superficial undertones.
Right.
So But I think that's a pretty good opinion piece. It's a pretty good take.
Oh yeah, I mean it's
So
it's hard to look ahead, and especially with everything coronavirus related, it's especially difficult to see sort of how film, just the film phenomenon that it has always been, see how it's going to progress going forward. Just because, we ended 2019 with such big films, good and bad, and now it's kind of unpredictable as to think what's going to come next.
It's true, but I mean, you know what? Only time will tell, and it's like we always say: if you keep going, you'll make it to Mars. And at this point, all we got to do is just keep going. So,
pretty much, no, that's true. Sebastian, where can the good people find us?
So, in regards to Twitter and Instagram, first Twitter, it would be at Mars on Life Show. Instagram, same thing, at Mars on Life Show. When we're talking about individual handles, you can find me at Dr. Sebi, Instagram, all one, and on Twitter, at Dr._Sebi. And for you?
And when it comes to my Twitter, you can find me at ManciniRA, and on Instagram, you can find me at ManciniRyan. I'm providing as many regular updates about both the isolation and coronavirus as they are released. And it's hitting me again that whole situation is happening. We talked about 2019 movies, and it made me forget why I can't go see people. You've been listening to Mars on Life. Please make sure that you find us over on social media at Mars on Life Show on both Twitter and on Instagram. And on top of that, you can find this show on Anchor, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Our artwork is done by Zachary Erberich, and our intro music is Space Explorers by Kevin MacLeod. I've been Ryan Mancini. My co-host, as always, is Sebastian Shug. And just remember, if you keep on going, you'll make it to Mars.